I want to talk today about our ears, these things that are on the two sides of our head. And my topic today is got ears. And we're going to look at the physical aspect of our ears, but also the spiritual aspect of our ears. You know, sound obviously goes through the gateway of our ear 24/7. And some catch our attention and others just go in and out and they never leave an imprint that's lasting. And then other sounds go completely through our ears totally unnoticed because we develop this, what I call selective hearing. You know, two people can hear the same sounds and one person will take that all in and have an experience with that, and someone else won't even recall what they heard because they're just closed off to that sound. It doesn't bother them or impact them in any way. So what it really comes down to is that we hear what we want to hear. Ooh, chew on that for a while. We hear what we want to hear. And then we just automatically block out anything else. You know, there's different kinds of sounds that we can get accustomed to. Like, for example, if my husband gets up in the morning and he's getting himself ready, I'm so used to that pattern of what he does to get ready, I can sleep right through it. Now, if I knew consciously that he wasn't home and I heard those kind of sounds or different kind of sounds at that time of the day, it would wake me up immediately. So we can grow accustomed to sounds and not hear them anymore. So it's an interesting thing that we have to realize that we do hear what we want to hear, and then we block out everything else. When you think about how God fashioned our ears and the ear canal and all that is involved in that so that we can hear something and make a connection mentally to what's being put through our ear canal, and then from there it drops down into our knower or our believer, and we make a decision then to believe or respond to that which we heard. All happens in a nanosecond and without our even really being aware of it. I mean, it's phenomenal, the high-tech way that God created our hearing and all the other capabilities that he gave us in these wonderful bodies that he formed and fashioned for us. I mean, he thought of everything. But the thing is, we don't only have physical ears, but we also have spiritual ears, and that's pretty interesting, I think. There's several different passages in the Bible that talk about our hearing capabilities, but there's one in Hebrews, I think, that's very interesting. In chapter 3, we're admonished not to turn a deaf ears to God's words. And I think in one of the newer translations, the way it states it, it's fascinating to me because it says, they never got there because they never listened. Whoa! It's important what we listen to, isn't it? And very important that we listen to what the Spirit of God is speaking into our hearts and what he's sharing with us out of the Bible, because those are ways that we begin to not only apply what God has for us, but before we can apply it, we have to really hear it. So we have to make a decision, don't we, that we want to hear what God has to say to us. And there's many different ways that he speaks to us, but that's a topic for another day. But today I'm just talking about our hearing ear and how we have to purposefully and consciously make a decision to hear the right things so that we can respond to them. And in so doing, we will reap the benefit or the reward from that hearing and that application. I was reading an article one time about donor fatigue. And that's a phenomena where it's very prevalent in our day for sure, especially the last several years, where there's so many different crises that happen, so many different unexpected tragedies that take place, and all these things that are going on, and the pleas then for extra help and finances. And after a while, we kind of close off to hearing those pleas for help, and we don't feel a tug in our heart anymore to respond to that. It's called donor fatigue, when you've given out and given out for this situation and that situation, And after a while, it's like there's just so many needs and so many ways to that people are calling and asking for help. You just can't do everything and respond to everything, right? So it's called donor fatigue. It's kind of like that old cartoon back in the day when newspapers were more prevalent than they are in our day today. I think the generation growing up of kids, they'll probably say, newspaper, what's that? But there used to be a cartoon section in the newspapers, and one that was often put in there as a cartoon, which is kind of funny, but it's not funny. But it's where the husband would be reading the newspaper and his wife would be talking to him, and he's intent on what he's reading in the paper, so he's not even listening to what she's saying. But every once in a while he goes, yes, dear. Yes, dear. So he has closed off from hearing what his precious wife is sharing with him. So the cartoon can usually go on in different kind of ways, but sometimes then the cartoonist will have the wife saying, honey, I'm going to withdraw $1,000 out of the bank and I'm going to go shopping. And because he's not even hearing, he just goes, yes, dear, that's fine, dear. Okay, dear. And so later she comes home with all her shopping bags. And he says, what did you do? And she said, well, I told you I was going to take out $1,000 and go shopping. And you said, yes, dear, fine, dear, go for it. So it's important that we pay attention to people talking to us and what we're hearing, because we might agree to something that we don't even know we wanted to agree with, right? So that's kind of funny if you think about that for a little bit. But going back to our donor fatigue, if we do what I call hearing fatigue, when we think about it, everything around us is calling for our attention. And in that way, it seems like everybody kind of wants a piece of our ear. It's become so common that we have an expression that's used often where we go yada, yada, yada. And that's kind of an expression that's come along to describe non-stop talking. And so when people are trying to get our attention, or we're trying to explain what someone else is talking to us about, we just go and yada, yada, yada. In other words, yes, they kept on going, kept on going, kept on going. So when we think about it, there's continual verbal advertisements bombarding our ears. I mean, the statistics out how many times that we hear advertisements throughout the day. And even our kids with all their electronic devices, they're being bombarded by the advertising companies constantly trying to get their attention on the little games they're playing and stuff for advertising other things, products that they have. So everyone's trying to get our attention. We have piped in music even everywhere we go pretty much. So you're bombarded with sounds there as well. And just everywhere there's sound. And we have become such a culture that is so used to noise that sometimes if we go like to a mountain peak or into a valley where there's no one else, the quiet can be so quiet, it's deafening. I have a place that I like to go out in Palm Springs. I call it my prayer place. And when I go out there, it's hidden in a cleft of a rock. And it's kind of off the beaten path quite a ways into the mountainous area. But when you go into that cleft of that rock, you hear nothing. Absolutely nothing. The sound of quiet is so deafening. And I've been blessed to take a number of people to my prayer place over the years, and whenever other people go with me there and we all are just quiet, we take a piece of paper with us and a pen so that the Lord can speak to us out there, because it is so quiet that you really are able to then just hear what's going on the inside of you. And it's very profound what will happen in that place of quietness, in that place of prayer. So in the physical realm, it's interesting, with so much going on, we have to tune out some of the verbiage, some of the noise that's coming in, because it's polluting us from being able to keep our focus sometimes and keeping ourselves doing what's in front of us, because we get distracted with this, distracted with that, and it can just be too much. But in the spiritual realm, it's interesting that we need to continue learning how to tune in to what the Spirit of God is saying. So we tune out all the noise pollution of the world system, but we tune in to purposefully hear what the Spirit of God is saying. So it's interesting that we have all of this going on in our lives, and we have this opportunity to close down so that we can hear what's going on in our inner man, our spirit man. So we know the flesh wars against the spirit, right? We know that. But the world is also clamoring to distract us and to keep our attention off of anything and everything that would be of God, because this system in the world does not want you and I to hear the voice of God, because when God speaks, his faith flows in those words, and we rise up and we go and we do exploits in his name, and that is so powerful. So we have to determine, don't we, to keep the main thing the main thing. We want to take time on purpose to be quiet and to let everything settle so that we can hear what the Lord is saying in our heart. That way we can apply whatever he said in our lives, and we can reap the benefit and the result of that obedience. You know, hear and obey sounds like such simple little words, but it requires diligence, doesn't it? It requires discipline and sometimes even self-denial, to take time to separate yourself, to be able to be in a quiet place just with God so that he can speak to your heart. I love what it says in Hebrews chapter 5. Paul was saying, you know, I've got a lot more to talk to you about this, but it's hard to get it across to you because you've picked up this bad habit of not listening. I love the way it says that. Not listening to what's important is a bad habit. So we need to kind of switch that around. And as we're heading into a new year, what an awesome time to rededicate ourselves to hearing afresh what the Lord is saying. Then in the next chapter in Hebrews 4, I love this one too. He says, God means what he says, and what he says goes. His powerful word is as sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. It cuts through everything, whether doubt or defenses. You know, we have defense systems, don't we? And we have our doubts, but the word of God can cut through all that. And he goes on to say, laying us open to hear and obey. Nothing and no one, he writes, is impervious to God's words. We can't get away from it, no matter what. Ooh, I love that. You know, many years ago in the early 70s, I had just gotten baptized in the Holy Spirit. My life with God changed so dramatically. And that summer, I did a study on hear and obey. Throughout the entire Bible, I highlighted everywhere that it talked about hear and obey. Revolutionized my life, changed me so dramatically. I just can't get away from that theme of hear and obey. It's so important. So if Paul said it's a bad habit to not listen, let's develop some good habits and let's begin to listen on purpose in order to obey. You know, it's important that we would take some time throughout the day, more than just once a day, but just shut ourselves off into kind of our closet to hear what the Spirit of God has to say. Now, the Jewish meaning for closet is real interesting because it referred to their prayer shawls. Because when they wore their prayer shawls and it was time to pray, they would just put their shawl up and over their head and it would make a tent or a closet. In other words, it would close off and all distractions from their sight and from their hearing so that they could focus on their spirit man, their inner man, and hear what the Lord would say. And so we also can find a quiet place somewhere, make a special spot in our home perhaps, or even sometimes I just go in the car and drive somewhere where it's quiet and I just am closed in the car and then it's just quiet and then I can just really be alone with God there. But we can take our time of prayer and we can just put it up over our head and just make that quiet place where we are able just to be still before the Lord and hear what he has to say, because one word from God can change the trajectory of our life and turn things around. And so it's very important that with all that's clamoring for our ears and our attention in these days, that you and I take special time to just be still before the Lord and let him speak to our hearts. Now, sometimes when I have quiet times with the Lord, I don't hear anything. I just bask in that quietness, that stillness of his presence. Now, initially when that happened and I would be in his presence and not hear anything or not feel God's presence, I was discouraged. And of course the enemy tries to make you discouraged, because he doesn't want you to take time to be holy, to be separated unto God, and to just listen for him. So he would try to discourage me, to say, you don't need to be doing that because he's not talking to you anyway. You know, he never tells the truth, does he? But what I've come to discover in all my times of sitting before the Lord and just being quiet, sometimes that's the best time of prayer, is just to be quiet and just let our ears hear what God is saying. But sometimes we don't hear him literally speak, or we don't sense his literal presence, but just being there, sitting at his feet like Mary did, choosing the better thing. That's a good discipline to get into, because what I've discovered is even when I don't come away with a sense of, ooh, God talked to me, or ooh, I felt God's presence, or wow, that was just a wonderful time. Later, when I need something, I need wisdom, or I need an answer, or I need something from the Lord, boom, it just comes right there. And I just think, you know what? That's because I've spent time in his presence. I've just spent time being with him, hanging out with him, without any expectation, without any big want-to list. You know, Lord, I want this, and I want this, and I want this. Or my big to-do list. Lord, would you do this, and would you do this, and would you do this? I just sit in his presence because I just enjoy being with him in that quietness. You know, my husband and I have been married a long time. In fact, a few months ago, we celebrated our 50th anniversary. And, you know, we can sit together and just be quiet and not say anything, and yet just be totally fulfilled just by being in each other's presence. In the same way, it's like that with our relationship with God. We don't always have to be talking when we're in his presence. Sometimes to just be still and know that he is God. I'm sure that in this little session today, I've probably gone over 20 minutes. I try to keep these 15 or 20 minutes, but I get so excited about what I'm sharing with you. And things like this, when I can encourage all of us, myself included, to continue to set aside different times of the day, that we would just be quiet before the Lord and let him speak to our hearts, or just bask in his presence and just be still and know he's God. He's worthy of our time. So what we're going to recap on this is on purpose. Pay attention to what you're hearing and don't let the things of God just be the things that you don't listen and pay attention to, because Paul said that's a bad habit people have picked up, is not listening to what God is saying. Those are the most important words, aren't they? Because they're words that are spirit and they are words that are life. So God richly bless you.